And there you guys go. Well, yeah, welcome everyone to the AILA SIG. Actually, I'll put my video on. Everyone, welcome to the AILA SIG. This month, we're focusing on HRI, human-robot interaction in healthcare. But we've got an amazing lineup of speakers here today. Please hold on until the very end. If you guys have questions or anything, use the chat. This is one of our events that's kind of leading up to our big Life Summit that's happening on October 21st, which will be virtual, focusing on everything AI, healthcare, and life science related. So hopefully you guys can attend our October 21st event as well. But without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Ross Mead, who is the Vice President of AILA and also the founder and CEO of a startup here in Los Angeles called Semio. But I'll let Ross lead it from here. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Todd, and thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for our panelists for agreeing to do this. I know it's late in some time zones, so appreciate the late night fun. My name is Ross Mead. I'm the Vice President of AILA. Todd and I have been at this for quite some time. Back in the good old days when we had in-person events, and we've just kind of been chugging away in the time of virtual events as well. So I'm the VP of AILA. I'm the founder and CEO of Semio, an LA-based robotics software startup. You know, today's topic is going to be on human-robot interaction, or HRI, in healthcare. My background, I did my PhD at the University of Southern California with a focus in socially assisted robotics, where we were trying to help people with special needs. So kids with autism, people post-stroke, older adults, and people with Alzheimer's, all to improve quality of life. Sort of that interest is kind of extended, I think, into the interest of this panel and the relevance of this panel. So generally, you know, robots are being used to help people in a variety of care-related applications. For many of these healthcare robots, a human is involved somewhere in the loop, whether it be for controlling or being impacted by the actions of the robot, or simply understanding the progress or the status of the robot in its own operations. For example, like humans might interact with robots via graphical or haptic user interfaces in robot-assisted surgeries. Or robots might interface with people through smart prosthetic devices and exoskeletons. We're not going to be focusing on that so much today. In this panel, we're going to focus our attention on healthcare robots that are using AI to make decisions about how to interact with human users within a shared environment to improve human quality of life. And tonight we are joined by representatives of California-based startups leading technology innovations at the intersection of human-robot interaction and healthcare robotics. So our panelists today are Mike Dooley, the co-founder and CEO of Labrador Systems, Jill Greczek, senior software engineer at Catalia Health, and Dr. Stefan Scherer, CTO of Embodied. Before we get into our panel questions, which we'll do for about 40 to 45 minutes, we'd like to get to know each of our panelists. And so could each of you please give a little background about yourself and your respective companies? Let's start with Mike.
I'm on the left side of the screen. Hi, Mike Dooley. Yeah, I'm a co-founder and CEO for Labrador Systems. We're developing a new type of assistive robot to help people live more independently, particularly either in the home or in senior care facilities. And we aren't announced, but we're getting pretty close to finally decloaking pretty soon. But I can give you a high level. But we focus on really trying to bring things within reach for folks that have impaired mobility or pain that's short-circuiting their daily activities. And we've actually been in pilots in the LA area since February and getting great results. So we're really excited to be talking here, and just can't share, we can't unveil today, but can give you a high level of what we're doing. My background in robotics, if you use Lego Mindstorms, I launched that brand back in 1998. So I've got gray hair and I've been in this for a while. So I started with Lego when Mindstorms was a skunkworks project and did the first launch of the product line. And from there worked at Evolution Robotics and another LA Pasadena-based company that did robotic floor cleaners, got acquired by iRobot and worked for them. And then my co-founder and I started Labrador. So glad to be a part of the discussion here.
And I'm sure I'm not the only person with any sort of robotics experience who would love to thank Mike for your hard work on the Lego Mindstorms. I'm sure you're aware that you've had a huge influence on anyone working in robotics. So thank you. Up next, Jill.
Hi, so my name is Jill Greczek, and like Ross said, I work at Catalia Health. So let me give a little background on Catalia Health and me. So Catalia Health was founded in 2014 by Dr. Corey Kidd, based off of his PhD work at the MIT Media Lab. He and our co-founder, Chris Dos Santos, designed the Mead robot in 2015. And I joined Catalia Health in 2017 after getting my master's degree and doing graduate research work at the USC Interaction Lab, where I overlapped with Dr. Ross Mead. And our robot is Mead the robot, which I'm sure all of you can see behind me. And we recently completed a pilot between 2019 and this year, 2021, with Pfizer for the rheumatoid arthritis medication Xeljanz with about 100 patients. And we're excited to be moving on to more projects and expanding those programs, existing programs with Mead. And yeah, I'll talk more about Mead in the next couple of questions as well. Oh, and also, hi. Hi. I have one here, don't worry.
It's always necessary to put the robot somewhere in frame. You gotta see it. So last but certainly not least, Dr. Stefan Scherer, please.
Thanks for having me, Ross and Todd. It's always a pleasure. So just very brief background about myself. I did my PhD in Germany in machine learning, and in particular with a focus on human behavior analysis and human behavior understanding. I think human behavior is super interesting. And in fact, actually at Embodied, where I'm the CTO, we're focusing a lot on human behavior and how that relates to what the robot should do in response to it. I then, after my PhD, joined USC and focused on human behavior analysis and how it relates to mental health, in particular depression and PTSD in veterans and service members. We developed a virtual human, so a digital representation of a human that screens for depression and PTSD. And it was like one of the first kinds of like digital characters out there that did this kind of work. I felt like I was reaching sort of an academic ceiling. Like we reached like maybe 1,000 people if you count every single person that we screened through that virtual human, but I wanted to reach millions of people. That's the reason why I joined Embodied in 2018. Embodied is a robotics startup in Pasadena that is focused on social emotional learning for children with a social robot. You see a little bit of robot behind me. It's more or less like the little robot with a big impact. So that's kind of like the shot that we used here. So Embodied has launched Moxie. Moxie is a robot that is currently available for purchase or rental. Shameless plug, I'm sorry for that. But it is available, and we've launched it in March, and we've had great feedback. It's exciting to see a product go into the market, be in the wild, and yeah, we hope we can reach the moon with this and even Mars. So glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And so just so everyone knows, like I said, we will be doing sort of an open audience Q&A near the end of this. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in chat. We'll probably see them scroll by as we're chatting, but we'll get to those at the end. And so, okay, so we know the people. Now let's start by painting a more clear picture for our audience of your robots and their cool applications. And so, I guess let's just get into some definitions. So in my definitions, because the definitions change, right? But a robot often has a well-defined physical structure or body that operates inside of a well-defined physical environment, such as a home or a facility, to accomplish a well-defined task, such as pick and placing items on a shelf, for a well-defined human stakeholder, such as a patient or caregiver. So you each work in your different subfields of healthcare robotics. So just for our audience, let's lay it out. What do your robots look like? Where do they operate? What do they do? And for whom?
So I can start because I can't show the robot. It's in one of the other rooms, actually. I've been testing in my house, and it's too heavy to lift up and show by one person. So we have a robot that's really, it's a very different sort of application that we can physically carry large items for people, large to small, like bring somebody their medication, help them carry the laundry from place to place, or set the table, those sorts of things. So we're really trying to work at where folks start using a walker, wheelchair, a cane, or they have arthritis. We have a platform that helps people move things, and that turns out to be really critical for millions of people that do that. And the robot is I think our direction and what we're going is far more R2D2 than C3PO. I think if you look at the world, I think probably a lot of you that track, I don't know, some companies in Boston that do robots that do backflips and dances. It's really interesting. It makes great for YouTube videos, but it's not what you're going to put in someone's home that's being discharged for hip replacement or other stuff, at least not in the near future. And so a lot of our focus is on the safety of the system, on how do you make something that can bring things within reach, but also be very safe, lots of layers of protection and very controllable for people. So we have something that's actually not too, it's closer to R2D2 in size, but physically can carry large items and navigate its way through an everyday home environment.
Oh, well, I guess I'll go next in order here. So Mead is an in-home healthcare endpoint for patients who have recently started a new medication. And so Mead basically comes home with you for your medication, or if you're part of a clinical trial or the start of whatever program you're starting, and stays with you in your home as an in-home endpoint to check in with you every day and also report any symptoms or side effects that you're experiencing to your care team. So because of that, she is primarily a social robot, and I think Stefan will probably have a similar response as well. So she has enough degrees of freedom to accomplish the tasks that she needs to accomplish, which is have a conversation. And a big difference between academic robot research and actually launching a product is that you want the minimum cost and the minimum sensing to achieve what you're trying to achieve and no more. So Mead, as you can see, she has a tablet. The tablet has a camera for face tracking. She's got speakers for text to speech, and then a motor control board for the head and neck motors. And overall, a pretty minimal degrees of freedom. Again, yes, compared to some of the robotics companies in Boston, but the point of her being in your home is to talk to you and check in with you every day, and yeah, be in your home or your office. So of course the human involved is a patient, and yeah, I think that covers all of them, Ross. We're having conversations related to healthcare in the home, such as my home office.
We'll dive deeper on each one of those points.
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to show you Moxie. So Moxie is a social robot that's designed for interacting with children. It clearly has very large eyes and a face that actuates, so it can express itself with emotions, with the facial expressions that are meaningful to the children, to like create a relationship, create a bond with them. This is the third home robot in this lineup. Moxie lives in children's bedrooms and noisy living rooms, in kitchens, everywhere you can imagine it. And it is fairly robust against all these kinds of noises. So there's a lot of stuff that is going on in people's homes. And we want to keep conversations going over minutes, sometimes hours at the same time, without the requirement of having to say, yet another wake word every single time you interact with Moxie. So Moxie really tries to understand the environment that it's in, not necessarily from a navigational perspective like Mike Dooley's robots, but rather from a social perspective, like who is here? Like, do I know these people? Do I need to address them? What is our next mission? What do we need to do together? And this is kind of like how we set up Moxie as a robot that helps children develop these social skills through actually being a mentor to Moxie. So Moxie is trying to learn from the children how to become a good friend to humans.
Gotcha. So many cute robots. Let's dive deeper in all those things. We have the mile high view of your robots, and we've talked about social robots. We've talked about a robot that's sort of like maybe helping as a walker. I am interested in how the robot is getting information about the user. So a robot often uses sensor hardware, cameras, microphones, lasers, combined with some sort of recognition software, such as location or object recognition, or speech or person recognition. And it's using these things to enable it to identify features of objects or people in the environment. So what kinds of features or inputs of the environment or of your human users do your robots need to recognize? And what hardware and software technologies do your robots use to detect those things?
So I'll start. We use cameras. I mean, I think that the same reason folks who are familiar with evolution and like the VSLAM and its path into now Roomba, cameras are incredibly powerful, versatile sensors. And, I think there's like Elon Musk rants on that regarding, versus LiDAR. But, the idea is that we first use them for visual navigation to know where we are under different conditions. And that's really important for our mission, is go to the kitchen or eventually bring this to that spot is essential for us. We also use depth, then we interface those with like depth cameras. So RealSense, using that to sort of with projected light, you're using that for obstacle detection as well. Our idea is to sort of do that as the scaffolding and then lay on more and more features, because you can multiplex what that camera is being used for. The same thing that's telling me that hey, RealSense is these dots are seeing, there's an obstacle that might be a dog or whatever in front of me, that I'm in the living room and I got to get over to the kitchen. And how do I get around can also be saying intelligently, eventually using AI to recognize things in that space. But the way we do it is really the infrastructure, like the scaffolding is more around sort of those core functions. And then once you have that, and that sort of sets your computation and sensor footprint, you get the rest of it. I think an interesting thing from this is sometimes you don't have to look at people to know, or even know that the person's there to derive information. Like one thing that we're seeing is just in our usage. I'll give you an example. The robot spends a lot of time next to people. They sort of use it as their side table. So it sort of goes to the name of the company. And we had folks that were looking at their use over time, that we placed the robot for weeks with them, and it's autonomous. They're just using it the way they want to. We were telling like what somebody's days were like for a Parkinson's patient, like when they were having good and bad days, because the robot was tracking it was going along with them. And the more frequently they were using it indicated they were having a better day, versus they were having a more, the lack of usage was showing that they had mobility was impaired, and their tremors, their ability to walk or move was restricted. So it's really interesting once you start putting the product and it gets used, that it's not necessarily that, oh, I'm using this camera to recognize the person and do like what you might think or script out. Even just before you get to that point, you start getting interesting information.
All right. Well, so for sensing on Mebu, I kind of already started to talk about it, but the main way that a patient interacts with a Mebu is through touching the screen or speaking the buttons that are on the screen. I guess let's see if you guys can see. So the main way that patients interact with Mebu is by touching buttons on the screen. So the available things that we're listening for show up on the screen as button responses. And then the patients can either speak or touch the button in order to advance through the conversation. We also have a camera for face tracking, but we really, the camera data is just for local face tracking. And I think that also speaks to our sort of feelings about collecting the minimal data about the patient for the sake of their privacy. So we are, of course, this is all HIPAA protected healthcare information data, but an interesting story about speech versus touching buttons and reading, basically. I think that, so generally patients appreciate that it's multimodal, but the vast majority of patients in our pilot just push the buttons every time. And I think this is used for a couple of reasons, but I think it's one of the big ones is that we're talking about medications, symptom reporting, things that are kind of tedious to speak out loud. But I think it also speaks to this idea of practicality of in the home, you know, that people are trying to accomplish a task and, you know, report something to the robot. And of course, it's fun to also speak out loud and have a full conversation. But if you're more task oriented of like, you know, I need to talk to you about this, then you're looking at actually getting it done. And I think that's one of those things that you see in industry that surprises you coming from academia. So it was an interesting outcome for us. And of course, we're for the sake of accessibility invested in multimodal display of information right now on Mebu and in future devices.
Great. And Moxie is at its heart a multimodal input and output device. So it takes into account multimodal modalities, in particular the voice, speech, and the facial expressions. So camera input. The sensors on Moxie are primarily cameras and microphones. There are touch sensors and IMUs and stuff like that that are being used for certain moments, but most of the time we're relying on camera and microphone input for Moxie. We decided to remove any sort of like additional inputs that are different from your human gestures and your human input that you use on a daily basis when you communicate with other humans, because we particularly want to teach social emotional learning and social emotional skills to these children that often have, for example, anxiety to have eye contact, or they do not know how to make friends, and they have other things that they would like to learn through Moxie. And so Moxie kind of emulates these behaviors through its own behaviors as well. Yeah, Moxie really tries to fully understand the human behavior. And I'm not sure if everybody knows exactly what multimodal behavior means, but I can give a very brief example. I hope I don't bore everybody, but basically, if you think about the word yeah, it can have different meanings. So you can say yeah, or yeah. But also if you're a dog owner, you can do that with no as well. And no can have tenses. Future, nope. Present, no. And past, no. So I'll leave it at that.
I have my headphones in right now, but if I didn't, my dog who misbehaved before we got in this call, yeah, I think she's got an ear out for that right now. Okay, so and we could talk all day about sensor systems and recognition systems, all that kind of stuff. There are interesting differences in trying to recognize behaviors from sort of young adults versus older adults versus children. So if anyone wants to dive into that at the end of this, by all means. I'm going to shift away from the person really quick, and now let's focus in on the robot and what it does. So now that we understand how the robot gets information from the user, what can the robot do to influence the environment or the user through its physical actions? So what are the kinds of responses and actions that your robots need to perform, and what hardware mechanisms and software processes are necessary to perform those actions? And I'm actually going to call out, I'm going to jump out of order here a little bit because I was really interested. I've always been interested in the fact that Mebu has physical eyes, and I love that.
I knew you would. I was about to say that for you.
So, yeah, okay, so Jill, tell us more.
This is what I love about her. When I first started working at Catalia and I saw the eyes, which I hope you guys can see the eyes moving around a little bit. She has a wonderful saccade, and I was like, oh, Ross would love this. This is great. Saccade is when it was rapid eye movement back and forth when you're looking from one thing to another. So obviously, Mebu is not physically affecting her environment. We're not picking things up or anything like that, where our interactions are purely social. So limited degrees of freedom because we have no physical interaction, but she does speak, express emotions, and of course make eye contact with the patient. So we have text-to-speech, we have face tracking, we have a microphone on board for speech recognition, but probably one of my favorite things about Mebu as a physical robot is that she does have these incredibly reliable eyes that really blew me out of the water back in 2017. I think it's a little more expected nowadays since then. But yeah, having the physical hardware is very fun. And of course, we're as folks at home might imagine for this type of stuff, right? The camera is not in the eyes. The eyes are separate from the camera. It's always a fun thing to bring up, right? So the eyes we have to do a little bit of math to point the eyes in the correct direction so that Mebu is making eye contact with the patient. I think that's about it. We can move on.
I'll move on since Mebu and Moxie are more related, I would say. So Moxie also like tries to really close what we call the sense act loop. So basically from a perceptive, like a human being, like talking to Moxie in a certain tone of voice with a certain facial expression, we would like to understand that first. So we perceive it first with a camera and microphone. We talked about that. We want to understand what that means. What intention does that have? Is that I want to continue engaging? I'm kind of like disinterested. Do I need a little nudge to move on? But what does that mean for my current and momentary interaction? Moxie then uses that understanding, this intent, and creates a plan for what to do next. So basically could be another activity. Moxie could suggest that we should do a meditation exercise to calm down, or a dance party to get more excited. Things like that can be planned then in Moxie. And then Moxie then, as I mentioned, it's a multimodal output device. It then produces a multimodal act, a multimodal behavior that then shows a facial expression. It talks, it gestures with its arms, with its arms and body. And the main function of Moxie's outputs are really to kind of create empathy with the child's emotions, build rapport with the child, develop a relationship with the child over time, and create engagement. Like any other medicine, in a sense, if Moxie has a positive impact, if you don't take Moxie or if you don't engage with Moxie, it does not help, right? So long-term engagement is key to our success, because if a child doesn't engage with Moxie, Moxie does not have an effect on them. So that's kind of like really the goal of Moxie's behavior, is to create the relationship.
I have a feeling we'll talk quite a bit about goals and decision-making in just a sec. I think this is going to be a really interesting topic there. Mike, I know that you are quite a bit different than the rest of the group. You've got a mobile robot, navigating around. How are you going about doing that?
Oh, it's fun. It's, today was interesting because I started off debriefing a woman that had the robot for 8 weeks, and we just put it in another person's home this morning doing the orientation. And when I tell people about it, it's like having a big dog in your house, and the dog can be nice and friendly, but you also have to, big dogs can knock things over and other stuff. So I don't know what the percentage is, but part of what we're focusing on is the action or the interaction that we want to have with the person or the environment, like bring this to that point, or take this item off of the shelf and bring it to someone. The other part is all the unintended things that we don't want to do. And that's where I think a lot of, boy, it's reason why like self-driving is taking a little bit of a long time to crack, is all the safety implications, all the scenarios of handling a complex environment, from just, okay, I don't want to run into things, to a cat jumps out in front or jumps on the robot. What do I do? So I think that's a lot of our focus, is we have a core behavior of physically moving like up to 25 pounds from place to place. Sometimes I think we might be trying to do too much, but we can actually lift even more than that, and then doing it in a really safe and inert way that people can control. And it tends to, and the home environment, I think what your word you used in your definition is well structured. It's really it's structured, but it's not, I don't know if it's well structured in, in these environments and things. And those are, especially rounding back to healthcare, like if someone who just got the robot and she has ALS and she uses a respirator, and thinking about the interaction of safely operating around there and how they use it and things like that.
Gotcha. And the term I was going for was well-defined, okay, in that it's in a home, well-structured, not necessarily the case. I agree there. Okay, so for everyone here, we understand our inputs from the user. We understand the outputs from the robot. Like, how do you bridge the gap between those two things? So, a robot often has some sort of mechanism that enable it to reason over its sensor input and make decisions about one or many actions that it could take. And that decision-making mechanism, like traditionally, is maybe where we think of like the AI element. And so it's usually guided by some sort of goal, as Stefan was mentioning. And so, what do goals and objectives look like for your robots? Like, how do they actually represent it in the little robot brains? And how does it reason? How does it make decisions about what actions to take to accomplish those goals? Stefan, I'm going to call you out since you brought it up.
Sure. Well, so obviously, it's a little bit of the special sauce, right? Like, that's kind of like where we have put in probably most of our efforts. One thing I can tell you, even though there are many actions that you can take, in particular, if you think about human behavior, I can respond to this question in like probably infinitely many ways. If you let me talk long enough, like probably very, very many different types of ways. But the main idea is that you want to kind of like go between controlling your environment, controlling your context as much as you can. So roboticists and HRI in particular, or like social robots, like to have very defined contexts because it's much easier to know what to say and what, if you know and control the context. So with Moxie, we kind of tried to go in between places where Moxie knows exactly what it wants to do, in particular, like the curriculum-like activities that want to teach you about something, a new concept, about kindness, about how to make good friends. Like, what are the steps that you have to take to get to know someone? Things like that. We want to be very programmatic and very prescriptive. In fact, if we recognize that children in these contexts actually fail to make progress, we actually do have scaffolding in place through our AI that supports the child's development and identifies, okay, they need help in this case. I'll let them go through this with a bit more help, change the goal difficulty for them, etc. We also do have very, very flexible, very free contexts where we have to make decisions on the fly. And you've heard about them. They're neural networks. They're very large neural networks sometimes. And Moxie does leverage the cloud at times for these types of inferences. They can be very complex and need to happen very quickly. And Moxie, as a robot that costs under $1,000, it does not have the computational power that it needs to solve these kinds of problems. So what we do is we leverage the cloud for these decisions. In particular, this is when we are within some free-form conversations where Moxie can talk about anything. And then the big problem there becomes, like, obviously we're working with children 5 to 10 years old. We need to be very careful with what we say. So what we are employing is basically a very deep bank of neural networks that both ensure meaningful conversations as well as safe conversations for these children. And then at the same time, we don't just produce the natural language generation or the natural language that needs to be said, but also the program that basically produces a meaningful behavioral code for Moxie. So basically like the gestures, the facial expressions that are meaningfully aligned with these kinds of processes. That's in a nutshell, basically, but.
Mike?
Go next. Yeah. So I think part of ours is looking at the setup of the interaction. So not only like how the user, like what the robot can do or how it chooses to do that or infer it, is simplifying the question that's being asked of it. And that's really important for the user too. And we've got to deal with a pretty broad range of people, like folks that are getting discharged from a hospital or don't feel well, or they're waking up in the middle of the night and they don't want to use their walker and like to move and get their medication. What we learned really well at our prior startup and then at validated at iRobot is really simplicity. Like Roomba just has a clean button and you can do more with an app to add layers to it. But that very first interaction is just one button operation and you try to automate as much as possible. When I pitch this thing to investors, they go, oh, great, it follows the person and it just, goes and there's, it just, that's how it works. And like, no, that's actually really complicated because you think about the engagement of follow me. And well, that creates a burden on someone. Like they have to be walking at a certain pace. And if the robot's doing it too fast, it makes them nervous. If it's not if the dog gets in the way and it doesn't catch up, then they have to walk back. But even like if I sit down to my armchair, where do I park? Where was the intention of the user? And now you created another burden to them explain it. So we end up being really simple. And what's amazing is how well it works. Is you just say, okay, our mission is to go from, pretty much get within a certain amount of centimeters of this target position so that the item is within reach of the user. And repeatability, reliability, consistency, and just simplifying that, whether they're commanding it by voice or hitting a button, we get really fast adoption. People just start using the robot as soon as we leave it in their house. And we want to add layers again, but again, just starting with the basics and being just super, super simple for people to use turns out to be really critical, at least what we're finding.
That's awesome. So Mead conversations are controlled by what we call the conversation engine, which is what I work on and design. So I could talk about this for the next hour, so I'll try not to. In terms of a conversation between Mead and a patient, both sides have goals that they want to talk about. So Mead might have conversational goals like, I need to remember to ask this patient whether or not they took their medication today. I have an update from the specialty pharmacy that I need to communicate to the patient. And the patient has their own goals that Mead doesn't know. For example, maybe the patient wants to change their daily medication reminder time. It's waking them up too early, or they want to report a symptom or side effect that they're feeling. And to the conversation engine is to present these topics. There's sort of to not get into too much detail. Different conversational topics on Mead are generally modular, and probably the best abstraction from a layperson's perspective is to think about it as constraint satisfaction. So there's certain rules under which different behavior happens based off of both what Mead's goals are and also what the patient communicates through conversation about what they want to talk about. And it's also really important that I point out that although a lot of this is AI, once the conversation engine starts running, it wouldn't be possible without the expert knowledge of our content and medical teams. What Mead says and how she says it, and all of that expert knowledge and information about how to talk to patients and maintaining a specific character. This is not simply generated through machine learning. This comes from human experts, and particularly we employ screenwriters and also medical professionals for using the correct language. And of course, this is also limited by legal restrictions on, of course, how you can give medical advice through, a HIPAA compliant device as well. So all of that comes together to create the patient experience. And so the subtleties of conversation is still very much governed by, very much the input of writers and people that are thinking about the patient experience and caring about the patient, and all of that coming together, I think, comes out as an experience with Mebu that helps the patients feel like they are being listened to and that somebody cares about them.
Jill, you set that up perfectly, because I am curious. We've been we're talking about all these inputs, outputs, goals, decision-making mechanisms, and so my question to everyone is, how do you modify an application, or how do you build a robot application, or a mission, or I'm not sure what each of you calls your robot app, but what's the process for designing and developing these applications for the robots? And who's developing? Are they all programmers? Is this all just machine learning over some large data set, or is a human hand in the loop? Please. I wish there was a mic I could hand around. I realize how important that social cue is, right? I'm just staring into your souls, but no one seems to know.
Yeah, well, to continue, I guess, so on Mebu, I think the design process for new features is not dissimilar from other software engineering design processes. So we start out with a concept of a desired feature, right? I can give an easy example of, let's say, Mebu offers patients the ability to set up, in addition to medication reminders, goals to do relaxation exercises, other sort of wellness related activities that are sort of complementary regardless of what medication they're on. And so let's say we have that feature. It starts with a design meeting. And a design meeting is not just from the engineering team, but also with content and medical about what is the desired patient experience. Before we even talk about how we're going to implement it, what do patients need, what's going on out there, what is their everyday experience, and what would be useful to how to get into that experience, how does it interact with existing features and conversational modules on Mebu. Also, from the beginning, we are also considering the data that will come through from these conversations and what we should be monitoring in order to evaluate its effectiveness. Even if that's just, okay, we've had a conversation and now for the beginning, when we first roll out this feature, we want to ask the patient, what did you think? Was that helpful to you or not? So all of that starts out in the beginning, in the initial discussion with everybody. And then only once those specifications have been designed, do we move from that to Mebu dialogue, being written, and the engineering work that's done to link all of those pieces together into a cohesive patient experience.
And I'll continue. And thanks so much for setting this up, for shouting out, giving a shout out to the team. Embodied is an incredibly interdisciplinary company. We have about half the company is focused on design and content and the graphical appearances and things like that. And we have child developmental experts as well on the team that need to design and review activities that we have with Moxie. We do try to kind of strike a balance between what we call the sugarcoating and the SEL learning. So there are stories that you can listen to, you can dance with Moxie, you can play games, but then also you have to kind of go on your missions. And those are mainly created by our design team and the child developmental experts. One team that we've been missing so far that I would like to also give a shout out in particular for this kind of task. It is incredibly difficult to work on robotics applications if you're not an engineer. And the only way to make this happen is by having an incredible tools team, a team that develops tools that are intuitive to individuals that have design degrees and don't necessarily know how to program a robot, and thankfully they don't necessarily always need to know how to do that. And I think that is incredibly important, incredibly valuable for that as well. Now, as a very ambitious startup that wants to kind of create this living character that lives in your home, though, we can't entirely rely on hand-authored content. The content that we create also derives from many conversations that people had with Moxie, that children had with Moxie in particular, but also large data sets that we've curated in ways that are meaningful for Moxie to generate content on the fly.
Yeah, and then for us, it's more about, again, comes back to this layers, is that we have debates, they're not very productive at the company, but on what is AI and what isn't. And, you know, like you look at a lot, like, so the vote in our company is SLAM isn't AI. You know, where you're basically, even at how you can incorporate AI in SLAM in different ways, but ultimately it's machine vision and algorithms that we actually want to be fairly consistent in how they work so that we can test them and get them to stable levels. And so the role of AI for us is more in the next level of like observation, interpreting what's going on in the environment and doing that. But for that, you first need to get to a secure sort of foundational level of autonomy. And that's, you know, that's both from, you know, from that point of view of all the programming and everything that goes into that, and then just really making these metaphors very simple for everyone. You know, our team is super small. It's we're interdisciplinary. It's like I've been a UI designer. I designed the programming language for, you know, for Robotics Invention System 2.0 that, and like whatever, and all those user interfaces and things. But it's really just trying to basically really get those foundations right, and then add the extra layer of complexity in a way that it doesn't do that. I mean, I have a huge amount of respect for what Jill and Stefan are doing, because it's almost the flip of what we are. And in part, we're relying on people and companies like what they're doing as future interfaces for us, because we just want to focus on that physical behavior part of it.
Mike, to go to your question of what is AI? AI is just adding more if statements to your program, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Todd, we're rebranding from AILA to IFLA. There you go. So everyone, I do see some questions popping up. Please go ahead and put your questions. We're going to wrap up here. I've got like 1 or 2 more questions I'm going to toss out. I'll probably cut the last one if we got some extra questions. This is going to shift away, I think, from the technology quite a bit. So when we talk about AI and robotics, it often brings up questions regarding data privacy, user trust, ethical use of the technologies and their impact on society. And so could you talk a little bit about some of the privacy, trust, ethics considerations surrounding the use cases of your technologies?
I'll start. That's a little bit easy, well, somewhat easier for us in the fact that, well, maybe it's not. It's one part of it is to contain it on the robot. So a lot of, you know, there's a lot of folks that sort of promote cloud robotics and all these other things. We actually do most of the actually all of the core processing and day-to-day operations on the robot. And our whole mission is to make that very low cost, to sort of be very lean and mean with it. That basically protects a lot of privacy right there, because you're not streaming information out about the user. Then what you then do is allow the user to selectively share information. That information I shared before about just seeing the activity that, hey, is mom doing something today, or has mom used the robot, versus, hey, I don't see anything. Then it gets into more of this permission level of what does the user want to share to select people, and what ways can that escalate to, you know, to intervene. So we try to take a very user-centric way, that this product is there to help them on their own terms, and then it's for them to elect what they want that data to be used for.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. We do also try to process as much information on the robot as possible. In particular for Moxie, one of the things that will never leave the robot is video data. So there's no raw video leaving Moxie. All the computer vision is done on board in Moxie. In addition to that, the parent through the use of their parent app. So there's a companion app that's on an iPhone or an Android device. You set up a unique pairing between the parent app and Moxie that allows the users to shield away any of the privacy revealing information from us. So even if somebody knocks on our door and like requires with a warrant that we give them the data of that user, we wouldn't be able to do it because we have no keys to do such a thing. We do want to understand, though, how as a population and how these children improve over time with Moxie, and we want to improve the product because it is such a complex product. We do need to get access to some of the data. We share that with de-identified information, so no personally identifiable information is shared with us. However, we do get access to some aggregate information about like the usage patterns, as Jill was saying earlier, like activities that work, that don't work. Which activities are the activities that children like don't finish for whatever reason? Maybe they're boring, maybe they don't actually have a proper exit and there's a bug that we can't reach the exit or something like that from an activity, things like that. So we do need to get some access to that. Well, we've tried to keep privacy and security in mind right from the start, and we designed it right into our product, in particular with a lot of onboard processing and these considerations that the personally identifiable information is not accessible by Embodied. Which also means that if you lose your phone or your key, that sometimes maybe there is a problem that you can't recover sometimes, but that is something that is just a necessary step, because otherwise, yeah, we wouldn't be doing these principles as we were mentioning them.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're going to see also if you have a bunch of robotics healthcare startups. I mean, that's, I think, what's so wonderful about being part of a small team and getting to really be in control of what's being done is, such I know for me, is such a wonderful thing about what we're working on, where, this is protected data. We are all invested in patients first, and it's just it's a great thing that that we can all be really proud of about what we're doing to protect patients. And I will, since folks have talked a lot, and I've already talked about HIPAA protected data, I'll talk about the other big ethical concern in Ross's question, which is what if you're going to replace people? And I'll talk about a little bit that for Mebu. So the current state of the art in the space that Mebu is in is phone calls. So after a patient starts their medication, a nurse will try to call the patients daily or weekly, and the normal drop-off time is in the first week. These are folks who are often performing dozens of calls before a patient, finally is considered missed. They just lose track of the patient. This is a high-cost operation. That's a high wait time, low availability of resources. People are unlikely to pick up a phone from an unknown caller, and really, it's taking away from these healthcare providers' job that they're actually trained to do and want to do, which is help patients. And so Mebu presents this elimination of non-critical tasks to point the healthcare team to patients that need help, give them a way to follow up where their calls will actually be answered. So we are augmenting the healthcare infrastructure in this way. And more broadly, I hope that in the future, we can move toward raising the minimum standard of care for a lot of folks.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, I just also wanted to mention, like, with respect to replacing humans, so Moxie is also not designed to replace any human. It's really kind of to augment the experience for children. Moxie is not the destination. Moxie is a springboard into real life. And so we want to teach these social skills to these children with Moxie in a safe environment where they can try it out and maybe fail without having the fear of judgment, and really kind of hone their skills before they go out and into the real world and try to experience those things face to face with other humans, The other aspect of this is that Moxie actually sends children on field missions. Like, okay, we've done this, how to make a good friend with humans. We learned this. Now go out, make a friend and report back. Let me know how it went, things like that. So those are kind of like the areas or the ways that we are trying to ensure that Moxie does not replace human contact.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that. There's two dimensions. One is about replacing people. Robots in our space are really a long way away from that. And our core mission is really to do two things. One is for that individual person is to make them less reliant on others or give them the choice in certain circumstances to do things on their own. That often happens even when there's a caregiver in the home at the same time. Letting people have the choice of whether they want to ask that person to bring them a drink or not, versus just having the option to sort of say, I can do this myself. So our first mission is to empower independence, to let people do more on their own. And then the second, and I think when people, there was a point in the chat about, are you rolling about people becoming too dependent upon it? Our first thing, or they're becoming less active, our first thing is to help people be more active, like help them sort of do the things that they like. If once you can't lift the laundry basket because of pain or some complexity with mobility, you stop doing the laundry and you sort of start spiraling down this activity. So our first mission is to take that empty basket to the laundry so you can unload the dryer, then you can go and sit down and actually let people do that. And that's incredibly important for them to do it. I think on the other flip side of it is on the care side, our mission is to extend the impact of caregivers. I can't think of one senior care operator right now that is at a shortage for labor in terms of the having staff to do everything they want. And when we talk to the staff, them feeling overwhelmed by the amount of tasks that they have. So our goal is can we take the more mundane task out or give that back to a person to have control over, and then let the people do the high touch human care aspects that they're much better fitted for.
Yeah, and actually on that note, I was going to bring up Zachary Erickson's question on possible over-reliance of the robotic assistant. Stefan, Jill, I feel like you touched on these things a little bit. Did you want to elaborate on those points at all?
Yeah, just a note, because it reminded me of a conversation that I had with Maya when we were in graduate school, which is there was this assumption for a lot of HRI studies that the patient would have the robot forever. And I think what we've seen, over the past, just with the preponderance of robotic startups over the past 5-7 years, is that's not necessarily the model, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think all of us will agree that what we're trying to do is promote patient autonomy, and different people require different amounts of support based on a lot of different things, least of all personality. And if a patient is with a MEBU for the rest of their life or just for a few months until they feel in control of their situation, the main thing that we care about is patient outcomes and improved health outcomes.
So you're saying robot autonomy for human autonomy.
Yeah, there you go.
To get to. Okay. Someone trademarked that quick.
Yeah, then they'll have to be Semio, I think, because legally speaking, now it's on the record.
I like that. So there have been some cool questions that have been coming across. There was one that got a +1. So I'm going to combine the questions from Joan Prensky and Dylan Chi, and I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly. I apologize if not. Jill, earlier you said that MEBU is a she. So how do you know that MEBU is a she? And in general, like, where do pronouns come up with your robots and the color choices? So we've got a yellow robot, we've got like a tealish blue robot, and we've got a cloaked robot. You'll have to let us sit on the secret, Mike.
Yeah, this question. This is the question, and I understand. So a lot of things go into like why a robot looks the way it does and sounds the way it does. In an academic sense, we're very interested in all the different combinations of those things, and I think this is another academia versus industry thing. In industry, we're interested in something that is appealing and something that is going to engage people, not just in an emotional sense, but also, from a commercial standpoint. So I'm sure if Corey was here, he would tell you a whole story about why the color this particular color yellow. I'm sure it took an agonizing amount of time to pick the color. But the main thing, all of the aspects of Meibu's sort of personality and physical body are all in service of creating and maintaining a specific character. And Meibu, even though Meibu never talks in detail about her backstory as a character, she does have a backstory that we're basing her dialogue and behavior off of in order to have a consistent character. And so I think that's about as much as I'll go into detail about it, is this idea of a consistent character that comes across through Meibu's speech, her voice, and the way that she looks.
So I can go, I'll give you one little spoiler. Our robot will be available in various colors of wood grain, seriously. So it's meant to be more, it's seriously meant to actually do the opposite, to stand out less in the environment. During our research, very first set of visits 4 years ago, had somebody ask if it could match to their cabinets, like in their kitchen. And so it's more, we go in a different world. We're more about fitting in with the decor. And we could make different versions and styles to match that, but we're really trying to get it to blend in and then see how people interact. And to the gender, we have a name for the product, but people call it what they want. It's been called Junior. It's been called Rosie. Trying to think of some of the other names, and so they ascribe the gender to it as they do it. It's a different, I think we're sort of going in a different world. We're much more like the astromech out of Star Wars, everybody calls R2-D2 a he. I'm not really sure that's right, but no one's ever wrote that. So.
Yeah, Moxie, similarly, we designed Moxie to be non-gendered. We allow the children to pick he or she or whatever they want to choose with Moxie. For me, honestly, it is an it. I do call it Moxie. I do not call it he or she at all. Just also, I tried to kind of keep neutral in this conversation because I didn't want to influence people at the company either. So we didn't want to kind of ascribe any gender early on. So we kept it very open. And in contrast to Meibu, Moxie talks about its backstory all the time, by the way. So, that is also something that we use to kind of give children the opportunity to learn about that other people have, or other robots in fact actually have some problems. Some of them are clumsy, some of them are nervous, some of them are really zoomy, they want to run around all the time and can't sit still and things like that. So we want to kind of get to these children with stories that they don't have to necessarily always associate problems with them, with their own self, but rather can learn about other people or other robots' problems through these stories.
Awesome. Mike, when you mentioned the wood grain thing, I'm actually thinking back to the vans with the wood around them for whatever reason.
The station wagons in particular.
Yeah. So that's. I used to drive from Illinois to Florida to go to Disney World in one of those when I was a kid.
Yeah,
so,
we haven't made a decision.
Fond memories of it.
Yeah, I have a decision whether we should go to the rich Corinthian leather that Ricardo Montalban used to talk about for, I think it's Cadillac or Buick. I have to look that one up, but we have to
partner with IKEA or some sort of furniture company. You can
exactly.
pair them up. Yeah. That's great. And actually, Jill and Stefan, you both kind of mentioned things about sort of like a clear character definition. At some point, I would love to chat about the notion of a character Bible, which I know is very common for film and for virtual characters, for chatbots, even for voice assistants. And so I'm sure it's here, but I would love to learn more about the differences at some point. But there are other questions that I'm going to ask from the audience. And so Andrew McGregor, a great friend of AILA and Semio, asked, how do the respective robots learn from interaction to interaction, or how do you gain information from the user to iterate on your applications?
So
I want to pick out Stefan. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So Moxie tries to understand, based off of the limited information that we have access to, how well conversations go, how well interactions go, and we try to learn from these interactions to improve the experience for a single user, but also collectively improve the experience for all users. So it's really kind of like a federated learning experience, which both has the idea of like improving individual outcomes as well as population experience. So it's really from the log data, from the information that we gather from Moxie in a de-identified fashion, and also from our beta and like user testing experiences. So we do have about, I don't know, hundreds of robots with other families that have received robots over the time. Like it's been several years now that we've done user testing that have experiences with Moxie that we then take into account in a manual fashion, right? Like we go through the logs, we check the video, oh, what's going on here, and then improve the experience. So that's kind of like the manual approach, and then the automated approach is really kind of like trying to understand what's going on and then improving the experience for the individual and the population based off of those things.
Yeah, I'll talk about the inverse of that and talk about personalization for individual patients then. Generally the program that Amebu has is very well defined in terms of like goals around medication and symptom reporting. I'd say the majority of the focus is on personalization for individual patients. So where do we get that information from? From patient responses, straight up asking them if things worked for them or didn't. And we also ask the patients a lot about themselves. Things to determine their personality. And we actually filter out sort of what type of dialogue and what type of content a patient sees based off of those responses to those personality questions. So because we have a very a more closed state space interacting with adults with a specifically guided interaction topic, more of our focus is on individual personalization through multiple conversations with the same patient. Of course, then we're also looking, of course, on a larger scale at just generally the effectiveness of different features and conversations.
Yeah, and for us, I think that, again, we're in this foundational level. We're trying to do things almost, they're not by script, but they're by algorithm. And then, the opportunity for learning is, what can we do better? What is there a way to observe the outcome and make smart things even smarter? Can you make the algorithm adapt better? So that means, like, why does the robot always come up to this point? Or we find that the user asks it to come up closer or do something different. So I think that's our next layer that we're about to get into, is just, okay, once we have our baseline, then what do we put upon it? But there's quite a bit of complexity, like things you don't understand, like the robot, when the battery goes low, knows to go back to its dock and recharge, just like Roomba. But if they just got their soup and they're eating it off the robot, you don't want the robot to go, I got to go recharge, and then, recharge for 2 hours and bring back cold soup. So there's this interplay. Like, we actually had to sort of give people options about, how do you want the robot to go back? And it's like more about, it's a dialogue, like notification. Hey, my battery's getting low. Got about 30 minutes. Do you want me to recharge now or later? And so it sounds really simple, but it's really essential for the usability of things. So I think that's where we'll be looking at and trying to sort of find a feedback loop to figure out what are those things that people are indicating are more successful, on that area.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking at the time right now. I think we've kind of used plenty of your time. We really appreciate the questions from the audience and your responses to their questions and mine. So I guess before we wrap up here, we'd love to know, how can people find out more about you and what you're up to? I can start. I'm at Ross Mead on LinkedIn and Twitter, and you can go to the Semio website at semio.ai or the AILA website at joinai.la. And to pick who I'm going to hand it off to next, I'm going to roll a d6 because I had to. So up next, let's go with Jill.
All right. Well, you can find out more about Catalia Health going to cataliahealth.com or Googling Maybu, or you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Jill Greczek. There's nobody else with that name, so it'll point you to me. And yeah, I would say really probably LinkedIn. I know Catalia Health has a Twitter also, but I would say the majority of our updates in terms of hiring, hello, anyone out there, would be following us on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And rolling for Stefan.
And yeah, so if you want to learn about Moxie, you can find out more at embodied.com. There are a few of me, but there's only one that's at Embodied. So if you Google for Stefan Scherer at Embodied, you will find me. USC still works as well. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and we are also hiring. So keep an eye out for the careers page on embodied.com.
Awesome. And Mike.
Thanks. So one way to track us is on our website, labradorsystems.com. It's very stealthy. So people say, oh, it's great what you're doing. And like, we don't say what we're doing there. We just sort of, so it's meant to sort of confuse people. So, but if you track there, that's eventually we'll have relevant information about the product. Same thing for me on LinkedIn, Mike Dooley. I think there's a famous self-help author by Mike Dooley. So that's not me. That's not my day job, but look up Mike and Lego and, iRobot, and you should find me. And then same thing. We're looking to grow the team, particularly in the area of software for Ross, developers, folks with really strong Linux background and vision recognition and AI. So reach out to us, particularly if you might want to spend some time in the LA area. So, thanks.
And also, I should have mentioned that these are all California startups as well. So we've got Embodied and Labrador Systems who are here in the greater Los Angeles area, and Catalia, who is, well, split everywhere, right?
Yes, but headquarters in San Francisco. Yes. Gotcha.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. Everyone at home, I'm sure, is applauding, and we really, really appreciate the time. Please continue to be engaged with the community if you can. And I'm going to hand it over to Todd, who can try and wrap things up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.